Why do people not like us? Over the centuries, why do people not like us? And I'll try to give you some perspective. I want to start by telling you I think that there's a difference between Jewish people and non-Jewish people. You all look the same to me. Why? I don't think it's genetic. It may be somewhat genetic, but it may be cultural. Jewish people hang out together. They have certain values, certain mores, and certain culture. And they've fought hard to keep that together over centuries. Centuries. And I'll show you what happened to it as we talk a little bit. So I'm a great artist. Where's Taryn? I'm a great artist. As you can see, I don't know if they can see the map up here, but let me tell you what it shows. It shows a map of Africa, the Mediterranean Sea, the Sinai Peninsula, and tiny little Israel, Jordan, and Syria. And so what is that? I always thought, why does Israel want that piece of land? Take Arizona. I was just in Arizona. It was great. Hawaii, even Uganda. In fact, if you go back in history, Herzl didn't choose the Middle East as his original place. He was looking in Africa at Uganda. Why did they choose Israel? Well, it was historical, it was meaningful. But why did it ever become an important place? I couldn't understand it. And I once asked somebody, and you have to go back in time. Africa was a place of riches. Africa had all of these natural resources. And in 2,000 years ago, there were no really good boats to cross the Mediterranean. They went by land, using camels usually. And everything that went out of Africa had to go by land around the Mediterranean Sea, back to Turkey and Europe and Rome. And that land bridge was Israel. Israel was the land bridge. It was the narrowest spot in that land bridge. And so over the centuries, you had things happen there like the moving of religions and the Crusades. They all occurred in that area. So let's go back to when the Jews over 2,000 years ago were in Egypt. And they went from Egypt across the Red Sea to Sinai and then into the Promised Land, which was the desert, Israel. And that's what happened, and they stayed there and they developed a culture. And after a period of time, they were invaded by other people. And I just want to cut it to the Babylonians, because the Babylonians, which are now Iraq, way up over here somewhere, Iraq came in and invaded them and took them as prisoners, as slaves. They came back, Judah Maccabee came back. I don't want to go into all the details, but the bottom line is they were dispersed throughout the world being then Europe, Turkey, all of those places. So they were dispersed. The diaspora occurred. A few people went back to the old Israel. And through the years, they stuck together. They kept their culture, and that's what's so unique. They kept their culture. Now, what was that culture based on? The religious people will tell you, oh, it was based on the Torah. Maybe it was. Maybe they taught it so well that they believed in its values. But maybe it was something genetic or cultural. They had good mothers. And they really had good values. They stuck together, and so they ended up in Russia. They ended up in Poland. They ended up in Germany. And throughout the years, they stayed throughout all these countries, the diaspora. And wherever they went, there was one thing that was for sure. They were hated. You ask, why is that? Why were they kicked out of Spain? Why did the Russians kill them in pogroms? Why did the Germans hate them so much? What was it about them that over centuries made them so hated? Well, I have my own feelings. How many Nobel Prize winners were Jewish? More than any other religion. All of these great scientists, musicians, cultural leaders of the countries, brilliant people, they were disproportionately Jewish. Why? Now, they were normal human beings, and perhaps genetically they were gifted in some ways. Not all, we know that. But something was different about them, and they had a culture that kept them together. But one thing you could count on, they were always persecuted. So in 1492, they were kicked out of Spain. We know that the Russians had pogroms in the first part of the 20th century and the last part of the 19th century and came in and just murdered people. We know that in the 20th century, the Germans made it their business to get rid of the Jews. And there you have it.
Pause.
And North Africa.
Everywhere. Everywhere you can name in the world, they were, thank you, Taryn. Everywhere you went in the world, they were hated and discriminated against. And so they came to the United States. And people in the United States, and my friend Marvin, who may be watching, we discussed this today. People in the United States say, oh, we're in the United States, nothing's going to happen to us. Keep your eyes open, that's what the people in Germany said in 1930. And the only thing that we have that makes us different now is that we have Israel. So how did Israel come about? Well, as I said, there were just a few Jews living in that little Israel after the diaspora, after the Babylonians. And they lived there. So the beginning of the 20th century, let's just go back 100 years. They're just farmers and they're living there side by side with the Arabs. Side by side, and they actually get along good. And if you want to know something interesting, in the Middle Ages, when Christians were fighting the Arabs in the
Crusades?
the Crusades. You know, King Richard, the Lionhearted, and everybody, they came to Israel to fight the Arabs. And the Arabs were hated. What's interesting is the Arabs were, at one point in the Middle Ages, some of the most remarkably educated and cultural people in the world. They had the best science, the best medical schools. And there's a book written called The Doctor, or The Physician, that tells the story of a Jewish man who couldn't get into medical school because he was Jewish in Europe and was accepted at the best medical schools in Syria because he was Jewish. Because Jews were friends with the Arabs in those days. Interesting story. So here we go, the beginning of the 20th century, and there's just these small enclave of Jews living in what was called Palestine, or nothing then. And there was World War I. World War I, there was something called the Ottoman Empire. It was a huge empire. It was Turkey, basically, as you look at it now. If you look at the map, they were over on the upper side of the Mediterranean Sea. If you ask Churchill, Winston Churchill screwed up so bad in that area in World War I in a place called Gallipoli. I won't get into that. However, there was a tough war. At the end of the war, Britain came to control the Middle East, Northern Africa, Egypt, and what is now Israel. And Britain's sitting there, and they don't even want this thing. They hate it. They have these few Jews, and they have these Arabs, and they're fighting for the little bit of land that's there. And they don't know what to do with this. First of all, in the early part of the 20th century, somebody in England said, you know, we got to give these Jews a place to live. We got to give them a little bit of land. And so there was something called the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration. And it just said, someday we got to give these Jews a place to live. Okay, that didn't amount to anything. But a little later on, about 1936, the English were still trying to figure out what to do with the Jews and the Arabs because they were ruling them and they were having terrorists go after Britain and they wanted to get out of there. So they had a commission called the Peel, P-E-E-L Commission, 1936. We're going to solve this problem. And they came up with a unique solution, a two-state solution, 1936. We're going to give half to the Jews and half to the Arabs. Now they gave 2% to the Jews. They gave them a little dot right around here, right around Tel Aviv, a little dot of land. The Jews weren't happy. They said, okay, we'll take it. We're not happy, but we'll take it. They gave all the rest of what is now Israel to the Arabs. And guess what they said? Nope, won't take it. Not enough. We want it all. And so that was the Peel Commission. Then you had, that was under the League of Nations, which existed after World War I. Then you had 1947. In 1947, the British wanted to get out of there. They just wanted to get out. They gave it to the United Nations. They said, it's your problem. We're getting out of here. And the United Nations said, easy. We'll just divide it in half. We'll make it a two-state solution. And they gave just a little bit of land around Tel Aviv and a little strip going to Jerusalem, a little bit to the Jews, and almost 80% to the Arabs. And the Arabs said, nope, not going to take it. So here we have the development of the Jewish state. It develops in 1948 with the United States being the first country to recognize Israel. We have the birth of the Jewish state, and on day one, the Arabs came around them on both sides, all sides. Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, they all came around them, said, we're going to destroy you and wipe you off the map, and that's the end of that. We'll have everything. But the Jews won. And so what we found then is they had a problem. Because they had a bunch of people who were living there, Arab people, and they didn't know what to do with them. Some of them went to Gaza. And Gaza is this tiny little strip in the middle of Israel actually, on the border with the Sinai on the bottom and with the sea on the west side. And you can see the sea is over here. And so it started the problem with the Gaza Strip because it was never a perfect solution. And from then on, it never got better.
Dad, can I stop you for a second?
Sure.
Up till now in the story, this whole room was filled with Arabs. What part of the story we did disagree with? But I guess what I'm getting at is, where are the facts disputed versus what's right and what's wrong?
So the Arabs would say, and what Todd just asked for those who can't hear, how would the Arab people listening to this story dispute it? They would say that the Jews had no right to that land, that it was their land from the beginning, and that the Jews were inserted into that, after World War II because the world felt sorry for them. That's their perspective. We were forced out of our land. That's it. Now you have to understand that when the 1948 war started for independence, there were a lot of Arab people in Israel. And the Israelis said to them, don't leave. You're part of us. We will protect you. You're us. They were told by the Grand Mufti. The Grand Mufti was a man who was their leader and who was a friend with Hitler. And they were told, leave. Run out of here. Get out of here. The Jews will hurt you. Anyhow, then they wanted to come back after the war, but that was too late. They had the Gaza Strip and all of this area here that we now call the West Bank. They occupied that. And that was fine until 1967. In 1967, in the meantime, just before that, there was a meeting in Africa, in Sudan. And this was a conference of all the Arab nations. And they made a compact to destroy the Israeli nation, never negotiate, and always say no to any proposal for peace. That's a fact. Bobby, you know that contact?
3 no's.
Great job, bro.
I'm sorry?
Great job.
Okay. So they developed that compact. That's important to know. 1967 comes. All of the countries again mass with their armies on the outside of Israel. This time you're done. You know the story of the 67 war. In 6 days, they were destroyed. Israel won. And they had to figure out what to do. They actually went into Syria. They were 30 miles from Damascus. They could have taken Damascus and kept it. They were in the Sinai and kept it for a while. The Sinai Desert and Peninsula was strategically important. And they had the entire West Bank. They took it over, which belonged to Jordan. They kept the West Bank. But it's a lot of Arab people living in the West Bank. They gave up the Sinai to make a deal with Egypt so that Egypt would have relations with them. And now they do. So what's happening now? We had the 73 war. I just don't want to go over it again and again. I'll go into one more thing. The 73 war, again, they attacked us from all sides and we won. Brilliant at the end with Sharon surrounding the Egyptian army. But over and over again, with Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter and Ehud Barak, offering them more and more land. More and more land every time. Just let's make peace. And under Barak, they came this close to making peace. And at the end, they said, no, we will not make peace with you. We want your destruction. There is the bottom line. To this day, it's not about making peace. It's not about land. It's about we want you dead. Now, they state that. They don't argue that. That's their goal. Yes.
Can I interrupt?
Sharon.
They being who? Because I think the Palestinian Authority, all these terrorist sects, you're talking about.
Remember the conference in
Iran.
Sudan. The
Right.
conference in Sudan represented the Arabs of all the world and what they believed was the only solution to the Jews. Now, do you hope for better? Yes. Do you hope for leadership which will make... Now, Sadat made peace with them. Saudi Arabia, UAE, is now starting to work with Israel and finding it good for themselves. But you still have the problem of the Palestinians. Now I'm going to give you a different perspective. Israel had a tough problem. After these wars that they won, they had an enclave of Arabs that they had no way to control. This little strip of land was populated by Arabs. For a while, the Israelis, after the 73 war, went in there and they controlled it and policed it. There were 1 million Arabs a day going over the border to work in Israel. Very successful. But then the Arabs wanted their own autonomy, and Israel left, and they voted for who to put in power to run their country. Not the Palestinian Authority, but Hamas. Now Hamas has only one goal: kill the Jews, destroy Israel. Okay. Now, from their perspective, in Palestine, in the Gaza, they are living in a concentration camp. They have terrible living conditions, overpopulation, and they're controlled. And it's a horrible problem. Israel has failed in dealing with that problem. They have not solved that problem. Frankly, lately, they've been paying more attention to other internal problems than that problem. And that's why they got in trouble. Now, you have to see their side of it. Even the Arabs in the West Bank are treated as second-class citizens sometimes. Israel, in spite of the world's pleading, keeps expanding settlements in the West Bank. Most of them are New York Jews who move there and are very aggressive. And it's a problem because we haven't been perfect. We, the Israelis, haven't been perfect in dealing with the Arabs of the West Bank and have not solved the living conditions of the people in Gaza. So what do we have now? We have now Hamas wants trouble. For them to start a fight is perfect for them because that's why they exist. So all these little dots here, I don't know if you can see them, are the little kibbutzim that are right on the edge of Gaza. And they were strategically attacked and people hurt. Are there any little ones? People hurt and bad things done that I don't have to tell you about in the last couple of weeks. So where do we stand now? Now we have to tiptoe around the tulips. And I have to tell you, when General Grant, Jackie knows I love the Civil War, wanted to destroy Vicksburg in the Civil War, he put a siege around it for 8 months. They couldn't eat, they couldn't drink, and they gave up. Nobody had CNN to look inside to see what was happening. When General Grant wanted to destroy Richmond in the Civil War, he made a siege around it. There was a lot of people starving, nobody drinking good water, and they gave up. That's what a siege is. Our boys wouldn't have to go in. Now with